My husband passed away, and my daughter inherited the house and $6 million. All I was left with was an old cabin. Then she kicked me out of the house, yelling, "Go live with the pigs, you poor old woman." Days later, what I found in the cabin shocked her. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment on which city you're watching from. That way, I can see how far my story has come. My name is Joyce, and I'm 56 years old. For 30 years, I thought I knew my family. I thought love and loyalty meant something until the day my husband died and I discovered how wrong I had been. The will reading was in the office of Attorney Morrison, an older man with glasses that slid down his nose as he read the documents. I sat in a worn leather chair, my hands clasped in my lap, trying to steady my nerves. My daughter, Amanda, was at my side, dressed in an expensive black suit I couldn't recall ever seeing her wear before. Her posture was stiff and expectant. "Good," Attorney Morrison began, clearing his throat. "I will proceed with the reading of Robert Matthews's last wishes." My heart was pounding. Robert and I had been married for 25 years. We had worked together to build a life, a home, a future. Naturally, I assumed everything would be divided equally or that perhaps most of it would go to me, considering Amanda already had her own successful career as a lawyer. "To my dear wife, Joyce," Morrison read. And I straightened. "I leave you the cabin on Pine Creek Road along with all its contents." I frowned. The cabin was an old, run-down structure that Robert had inherited from his father years before. We had never done anything with it because it needed so much work. "To my beloved daughter, Amanda," Morrison continued, "I leave the family home on Maple Street, all bank accounts, investments, and the sum of $6 million. The world stopped. $6 million. The house where I had lived for 25 years, everything we had built together. Amanda had received everything, and I had received a cabin that was falling apart. "There must be a mistake," I murmured. My voice barely a whisper. Amanda turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's no mistake, Mom. Dad knew what he was doing." Attorney Morrison looked at me with something resembling pity. "The terms are very clear, Mrs. Matthews. Your husband was very specific about his wishes." We left the office in silence. The April sun felt too bright, almost cruel. During the drive home, Amanda didn't say a word, but I could feel her satisfaction emanating from her like heat from a furnace. That evening, as she prepared dinner, as she had for decades, Amanda finally spoke. "Mom, we need to talk about living arrangements." I laid the knife down on the cutting board. "What arrangements?" "Well, this is my house now, and frankly, I think it's time you had your own space." I stared at her, waiting for some sign that she was joking. "Amanda, this has been my house for 25 years. This is where I built my life with your father. Dad's not here anymore," he said coldly. "And this house is mine. Now you have the cabin." "The cabin has no electricity, Amanda, or running water. The roof is falling in." He shrugged as if my problems were trivial. "Then you'll have to fix it." "No, look, I don't want this to get nasty. I'm giving you 1 week to pack your things." I felt like I'd been slapped. 1 week. 1 week, he repeated. And then added with an icy smile, "Consider this a chance for independence, Mom. You always said you wanted more time for yourself." The next few days were a whirlwind of confusion and heartache. I packed my personal belongings, the family photographs, the clothes that fit into 2 suitcases. Amanda watched everything like a hawk, making sure I didn't take anything I considered valuable. She didn't tell me this when I tried to take the china set my mom had given me. That came with the house. It was my mom's, Amanda's, and now it's part of my inheritance. On the last day, as I was loading my bags into my old Honda, Amanda came out of the house. She was wearing a new designer dress and jewelry I didn't recognize. "I hope you understand this isn't personal, Mom," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. Dad obviously had his reasons for doing this. "And what do you think those reasons were?" I asked. My voice cracking slightly. Amanda leaned closer to me, and for a moment I thought maybe finally would show some compassion. Instead, his expression hardened. Maybe because he finally realized that you were always a burden, always depending on him, never really contributing. Maybe he wanted to make sure that I, who actually made something of my life, got what I deserved. His words hit me like bullets. Amanda, I sacrificed my career to raise you. I quit my job to be a stay-at-home mom because you and your father wanted it that way. No one forced you to do anything, Mom. Those were your choices. I climbed into the car, my hands shaking. Amanda stood in the driveway watching me drive away from the only home I'd ever known as an adult. By the time I got to the cabin, the sun was setting. The structure looked even worse than I remembered. The paint was peeling, there were broken windows, and the porch ladder wobbled dangerously. But it was all I had. That first night, lying on the floor on an old blanket, looking up at the stars through a hole in the roof, I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Not just from the loss of my home, but from the loss of the daughter I thought I knew. How had it come to this? How had the child I had raised, who I had loved unconditionally, turned into someone so cruel? But as the tears dried on my cheeks and the silent forest surrounded me, a small spark of something ignited in my chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't yet determination. If Amanda thought I would give up, if she thought I would break, she was sorely mistaken. I had no idea what awaited me in that old, seemingly useless cabin. I had no idea my life was about to change forever. The first few days in the cabin were the hardest of my life. Without electricity, I relied on candles and an old lantern I'd found in a dusty drawer. Without running water, I had to walk half a mile to a still-working well, carrying buckets that grew heavier every day. My hands, which had been accustomed to the comfort of a suburban life, became covered in blisters and cuts. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional. On the third day, my sister Linda called me. Her voice sounded strange, distant. "Joyce, is what Amanda says true? What is she saying?" I asked, although part of me already knew. "She says you attacked the lawyer when you read the will, that you screamed and made a scene because you weren't left all the money." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "Linda, that is completely false. I never also says you've been harassing her, demanding money, threatening to hire a lawyer to contest the will. That's a lie." My voice cracked. "Linda, I'm your sister. You know me better than that." There was a long, painful pause. "I don't know what to think, Joyce." Amanda seemed very upset when she called me. "She said she was afraid of you." After we hung up, I sat on the rotten wooden floor of the cabin and cried until I had no tears left. Amanda had not only taken my home from me, but she was systematically destroying all my other relationships. The next day, my sister-in-law Margaret canceled our tradition of lunch on Fridays. "I think it's best if you take some time for yourself, Joyce, to reflect on things." Then it was my cousin Sarah, who had been like a sister to me. "Amanda says you've been drinking a lot since Robert died. Maybe you should get some help." Every phone call was a stab. Amanda had carefully constructed a narrative where I was the villain, the greedy, desperate widow who couldn't accept that her own husband wouldn't trust her with his fortune. A week after I moved into the cottage, Amanda showed up at my door. She arrived in a new, bright red BMW, wearing a coat that probably cost more than my car. "Hi, Mum," she said with a fake smile. "I came to see how you're settling in." I peered at her through the broken screen door, trying to process her presence. "What do you want, Amanda?" "Can't I visit my mom?" She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Wow, this place really is a mess, isn't it? Look at those broken windows and that roof. My God, are you really living here?" "I don't have a choice." "Well, I guess you'll just have to make it work." She leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You know, Mom, I've been talking to the family about you." My stomach sank. "What have you been telling them?" "Just the truth, that you've been very bitter since the will reading, that you can't accept Dad's choices, that you've been making some very nasty comments about me, Amanda." That's not true, and you know it. She shrugged. Perception is reality, Mom, and perception is that you're not handling grief well. Then she turned and started walking back to her car, but she stopped and looked over her shoulder at me. Oh, and Mom. Linda mentioned that you could try to contest the will. Just so you know, Dad worked with the best lawyer in the state. Everything's tightly sealed, legally. If you try anything, you'll only lose what little money you have. After she left, I stood in that broken gate for a long time, watching her car disappear down the dirt road. The reality of my situation hit me like an avalanche. Not only had I lost my home and my family, but Amanda had systematically destroyed my reputation. That night, as I tried to repair one of the broken windows with duct tape and cardboard, I reflected on the past 25 years. Had I really been such a bad mother, such a bad wife? I remembered when Amanda was 8 and came down with pneumonia. I had spent 3 straight nights in the hospital sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, holding her hand. I remembered all the school plays I attended, all the science projects I helped with, all the nights I stayed up waiting for her to come home as a teenager. I remembered when Robert lost his job in 1998 and I went back to work as a secretary to keep the family afloat. I remembered how I left that job when he found a better one, because he said it was important that someone be home for Amanda. Had those things meant anything to him? Had they meant anything to Amanda? Apparently not. 2 weeks after I moved in, my nearest neighbor, Mr. Henderson, came to visit. He was an older man who had known Robert for years. Joyce said, taking off his cap, "I'm so sorry about Robert and I'm even sorrier about what's happening to you." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I've lived here for 40 years, she continued, and I know the value of this land. Your husband was a smart man. Very smart. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but her words stayed with me. By the end of my second month in the cabin, I had lost 15 pounds. My hands were calloused and rough. My hair had lost its shine, and new lines had appeared around my eyes. But there was something else. There was a hardness to my condition before. One morning, as I was sweeping debris off the porch, I found an odd key, partially buried beneath some loose boards. It was unlike any key I'd ever seen before, heavy and intricately designed. I held it in the sunlight, turning it between my fingers. What door would this key be for? In a cabin I thought I knew every corner of, I'd found something entirely new. That night, as the candles flickered around me and the forest rustled outside, I examined the key more closely. It was engraved with tiny symbols I couldn't decipher, and something told me this was no ordinary key. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair or sadness. It was curiosity. And beneath that curiosity lay something more dangerous, hope. I didn't know then that that small, bronze key was going to change everything. I didn't know that my life of exile was about to transform into something entirely different, something that would give Amanda a surprise she never saw coming. My obsession with the key consumed me for days. I carried it in my pocket as I went about the daily tasks of survival, gathering firewood, fetching water, trying to patch the leaking roof. Each night, by candlelight, I examined it, trying to decipher its purpose. The engraved symbols looked familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd seen them before. They were small, delicate, as if made by a skilled craftsman. The key itself was heavy, made of a metal that didn't look like common bronze. On the 4th day after finding it, I decided to inspect the cabin more systematically. During the months I'd been living there, I'd been too busy trying to survive to really explore. Now, with the key as motivation, I began searching for any locks, compartments, or hiding places that might correspond. I started in the basement, a damp, cobwebbed space I'd avoided until now. Armed with my flashlight and renewed determination, I descended the wooden stairs that creaked ominously under my weight. The basement was larger than I expected, extending beneath the entire structure of the cabin. The walls were unpolished stone, and the floor was packed earth. In one corner was a stack of old boxes covered in dust. In another, rusty tools hung from hooks on the wall. That's when I saw it. A small metal door was set into the back wall, almost hidden behind an old bookshelf. My heart began to beat faster as I approached. The door had a small, ornate lock engraved with the same symbols I had seen on the key. With trembling hands, I took the key from my pocket and inserted it into the lock. It fit perfectly. The mechanism turned with a soft click. Despite the years it had likely been locked, the door opened, revealing a small space, like a safe built into the wall. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a smaller metal box. I took both items carefully and went upstairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Once upstairs, under the best light I could get, I opened the envelope first. It contained legal documents that I didn't understand at first, property deeds, topographical maps, and papers with official state seals. But as I read more carefully, using a magnifying glass I found in one of the drawers, I began to understand what I was holding in my hands. They were mineral rights, mining rights for the entire property where the cabin was located, and not just for the small plot I could see, but for 200 acres heading up into the hills. My breath quickened as I read the documents. According to papers dating back to the 1920s, Robert's family had owned the mineral rights to this land for generations. But more importantly, there was a recent geological report dated just 2 years before Robert's death. The report indicated significant deposits of high-quality quartz, as well as possible veins of semi-precious stones. But what took my breath away was the last page, a purchase offer from a mining company for the mining rights. The offer had been made 6 months before Robert died, but according to a handwritten note in the margin, he had rejected it. "I will bide my time," he had written in his familiar handwriting. With hands that trembled violently, I opened the smaller metal box. Inside was a sealed letter with my name written in Robert's handwriting. "My dearest Joyce," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means you found what I left for you. I hope Amanda wasn't too cruel, but knowing her nature, she probably was." I had to stop reading to wipe away the tears that had begun to fall onto the paper. "I know you're probably wondering why I did things this way," the letter continued. "Why did I give the house and the money to Amanda, while leaving you this cabin that seems worthless? The answer is simple. I know you, Joyce. I know your strength, your resilience, your ability to survive and thrive even in the most difficult circumstances. Amanda never had to fight for anything. We gave her everything on a silver platter, and I'm afraid that turned her into someone I don't recognize, someone greedy, manipulative, with no real compassion for others. If I had left everything to you directly, she would have found a way to take it from you, legally or illegally." My breathing was ragged as I continued reading. "But you, my love, you have something Amanda will never have. True inner strength. I knew that if anyone could survive in that cabin long enough to find this treasure, it would be you. Consider it a final test, one Amanda would never have passed. The mineral rights to this property are worth far more than the house and the money I left Amanda, but more than that, they are your freedom, your independence, your chance to live the rest of your life on your own terms, without depending on anyone. There are more documents in the bank vault, in a lockbox registered under your name. The box number is on the back of this letter. Use it wisely. I loved you during all our years together, Joyce. I'm sorry I put you through this ordeal, but I knew you were strong enough to make it through. Now live for both of us." At the end of the letter was a number. 247. I sat on the cabin floor for a long time, reading and rereading the letter. Robert had orchestrated all of this. The will that seemed so cruel, so unfair, had actually been his way of protecting me from Amanda while also giving me something she could never touch. But there was something else in his words that made me feel a mixture of love and pain. He had known me well enough to know I would survive this ordeal, but he had also known Amanda well enough to know she would betray me. How long had I known our daughter was capable of such cruelty? When I'd seen the person she'd become that night, for the first time in months, I didn't feel hopeless, I didn't feel abandoned or betrayed. I felt something I'd forgotten how to feel. Powerful. Amanda thought she'd destroyed me. She thought she'd won, that she'd finally rid herself of the mother she considered a liability, but she had no idea what she'd really inherited. She had no idea that her cruelty had been exactly the test Robert had hoped I'd fail. The next day, I drove to the bank in town. Lockbox 247 contained even more documents, including updated geological reports and correspondence with 3 different mining companies, all interested in extraction rights. The most recent offer was dated a week earlier. Of Robert's death was for $7 million. As I drove back to the cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about Amanda. Probably back in the house that used to be mine, spending the money she thought was her big win. She didn't know that her mother, the woman she'd treated like dirt, had just become a millionaire. But it wasn't the time for the reveal yet. First, I had to decide exactly how I wanted to use this newfound power. One thing was certain. Amanda had gravely underestimated the woman she'd raised. The next few days were a whirlwind of quiet research. I'd decided not to do anything rash. Robert had been meticulous in his planning, and I would be just as careful in the execution. First, I contacted a different attorney, one in the next town over who didn't know Amanda. Mr. Peterson was an older man specializing in mineral rights and land transactions. When I showed him the documents, his eyes lit up with professional interest. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, adjusting his glasses to better examine the papers. "This is extraordinary. Your husband had impeccable documentation here. These mineral rights are legitimate and completely separate from any other inheritance." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that although your daughter inherited the house and the money, these mineral rights are completely independent. They are specifically in her name and cannot be challenged or claimed by anyone else." I felt a wave of relief. "And the offers from the mining companies?" Peterson smiled. "Very legitimate. In fact, I know 2 of these companies. They have excellent reputations. But, Ms. Matthews, before you make any decisions, I recommend you obtain an independent geological appraisal. Prices for semi-precious stones have risen significantly in recent years. Following your advice, I hired an independent geologist to do his own appraisal of the property. Dr. Martin Reeves was a man in his 50s with a gray beard and eyes that sparkled with enthusiasm when he talked about rocks and minerals. For 3 days. I watched him walk my property with strange equipment, taking samples, making measurements. I continued with my daily routine, maintaining the facade of the abandoned woman struggling to survive in a dilapidated cabin. Meanwhile, I began to observe Amanda's behavior more closely. It wasn't difficult to glean information about her in a small town. People were talking, especially at the post office and the supermarket. What I heard surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. "That Amanda Matthews is spending money like it would never run out," Mrs. Gonzalez murmured in the supermarket line. "She's bought 3 in the last month. And that trip to Europe she's planning," her friend added. 2 months in the finest hotels. It must be costing a fortune. "My niece works at the jewelry store downtown," Mrs. Gonzalez continued. "They say Amanda's been there 4 times, buying necklaces and bracelets that cost more than my annual salary." I listened to these conversations with growing fascination. Amanda was doing exactly what Robert had predicted, squandering money without any regard for the future. A week later, Dr. Rips handed me his report. His smile was even wider than before. "Mrs. Matthews, your property is a literal treasure. The quartz deposits are extensive and of high quality, but that's not the most exciting part." What else did he find? Amethyst. A lot of gem-quality amethyst and something even better. Green tourmaline. The specimens I found suggested significant deposits. I didn't know much about gemstones, but Dr. Reeves's expression told me this was good, very good. "What value are we talking about?" I asked. "Conservatively, I'd say the mining rights could be worth between $10 and $15 million, possibly more if the tourmaline deposits are as extensive as I suspect." $15 million, 3 times what Amanda had inherited. And that was being conservative. That evening, as I ate my simple dinner by candlelight, I couldn't help but smile. Robert had known exactly what he was doing. He had turned my apparent humiliation into the greatest victory of my life. But my investigation didn't stop. That's when I began to pay more attention to Amanda's activities, not out of spite, but out of strategic curiosity. One afternoon, while I was at the bank making some minor transactions, I overheard a very interesting conversation. Amanda was at the counter next to mine, and her voice was loud enough that it was impossible not to hear. "I need to transfer another $50,000 to my investment account," she was telling the teller. "And I also need information about loans against my inheritance. I have some major expenses coming up." Loans against your inheritance. That meant I was already spending more money than I had immediately available. After she left, I waited a few minutes before approaching the same teller. He was young, probably new on the job, and seemed a little overwhelmed. "Excuse me," I said in my most motherly voice, "but the woman who just left is not Amanda Mathus. I think she might be related to me." "Oh, yes. Mrs. Matthews has been very busy lately with all her transactions." "Transactions? Well, I shouldn't talk about other clients' business," she said, but then she leaned forward as if about to share some juicy gossip. "But between you and me, I've never seen someone spend money so fast. Large withdrawals almost every day." This was valuable information. Amanda wasn't just spending Robert's money, she was spending it at an unsustainable rate. A few nights later, while going through Robert's papers for the umpteenth time, I found something I'd overlooked before, a small note written in the margin of one of the older geological reports. Amanda never had the patience for the things that really matter, she always wanted immediate gratification. Joyce, on the other hand, understands the value of waiting for the right moment. Robert had understood our daughter better than I'd realized. He'd seen her impulsive nature, her need to have everything immediately, and had used that weakness against her. The next day, I decided to pay a little visit to the village. It had been weeks since I'd left the property, except for the essentials. But now I was curious to see how Amanda was handling her newfound wealth. I found her in the most expensive clothing store in town, trying on a coat that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the last 5 years. "What do you think of this one?" she asked the saleswoman, turning in front of the mirror. "It's for my trip to Paris next month." "You look beautiful on me, Mrs. Matthews," the saleswoman replied. "And we have shoes that match perfectly." From my position behind a rack of scarves, I was able to observe Amanda without being seen. Her behavior was revealing. She shopped compulsively, choosing the most expensive items, without even asking the price. It was as if she were trying to compensate for something, as if money could fill a void she didn't even know she had. When she left the store with 3 large bags, I followed at a discreet distance. Her next stop was the travel agency, where she spent over an hour planning what appeared to be a very extravagant vacation. After that, she went to a real estate agent's office. Through the window, I could see her looking at brochures for houses that were clearly out of reach, even with her inheritance. It was fascinating and sad at the same time. Amanda was acting exactly like a person who had won the lottery and had no idea how to handle sudden wealth. She was making impulsive decisions that would lead to financial ruin within a few years. That night, back at my cabin, I did some basic calculations based on what I had observed and heard. Amanda was spending approximately $50,000 per month. At that rate, her $6 million would last less than 10 years. And that wasn't counting the interest she was likely accruing on loans. Robert had been right. Amanda didn't have the discipline or the wisdom to handle true wealth, but I did. As the candles flickered around me and the forest whispered in the darkness outside, I made a decision. It was time to start turning my mineral rights into reality, but I would do it my way, on my terms, and when the timing was perfect. Amanda would have her surprise, but first, she would have her downfall. 6 months after moving into the cabin, my life had changed in ways I could never have imagined. I had sold the mineral rights to the most reliable mining company for $12 million after careful negotiation that also assured me of future royalties. But I kept my life simple, at least outwardly. He still lived in the cabin, although it now had electricity and running water discreetly installed. From the outside, the place still looked run down, exactly as Amanda expected it to, but inside she had made subtle but significant improvements for my comfort. My attorney, Mr. Peterson, had structured everything so that the money was completely protected and diversified. I had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life and much more. But more important than the money was the feeling of control I had regained over my own existence. Meanwhile, he had been watching the predictable progression of Amanda's life. My sources of information in town had become more reliable as people began to view me sympathetically. The poor old woman abandoned by her cruel daughter. What I heard was exactly what I had expected, but I was still surprised by the speed of Amanda's fall. He has sold 2 of the 3 cars he bought, Mrs. Gonzalez informed me during one of our chance encounters at the supermarket, and he canceled that trip to Europe he had planned. Really? I asked, feigning surprise. My sister-in-law works at the bank. He says Amanda has been there almost every day trying to get more loans. Apparently he already owes more than $200. 200,000 in debt in just 6 months. Amanda's rate of self-destruction was even faster than she had estimated. But what really confirmed to me that her world was falling apart was when I saw her at the pharmacy on a Tuesday afternoon. It looked different. His hair, which he had always kept perfectly groomed, was unkempt. His clothes, although still expensive, looked wrinkled, but the most revealing thing was his eyes. They had the desperate look of someone who was finally realizing the consequences of their actions. He was shopping for anxiety medications and sleeping pills, speaking quietly but urgently to the pharmacist about whether his insurance would cover the cost. That night, while eating dinner in my now comfortable cabin, I received the call I had been waiting for. Mom. Amanda's voice sounded small, vulnerable, in a way she hadn't heard since she was a child. Hello, Amanda. Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come see you? I looked out the window into the darkness of the forest, feeling a strange calm. Of course. When? Now. It's urgent. It's okay, you know where to find me. An hour later I heard the familiar sound of his car approaching down the dirt drive, but when I stepped out onto the porch, I saw that it was no longer the bright red BMW. It was a used sedan, probably 10 years old. Amanda got out of the car slowly, as if each movement cost her an effort. When she came to the porch light, I could see that she had been crying. Mom, his voice began, breaking. I have made terrible mistakes. I did not respond immediately. I just stood there watching her, remembering all the times she had come to me with problems when she was younger and how those visits had stopped completely when she got married and decided she no longer needed me. Do you want to come in? I finally asked. She nodded and I guided her into the cabin. He had made tea as if he had known this conversation was coming. Amanda sat in the chair she had set up for visitors, looking around with eyes that seemed to see the place for the first time. It's really not as bad as I thought. He murmured. You have made improvements. I have done what I could. He was silent for a long moment, wringing his hands in his lap. He finally looked up at me. Mom, I'm in trouble. Serious problems. What kind of problems? Money. I owe a lot of money, more than I can pay. How much? $400,000. His voice was barely a whisper. I thought I had more time. I thought Dad's money would last forever, but I made stupid investments. I spent without thinking. I looked at her, this woman who had been my baby, my little girl, and who had become someone I barely recognized. But now, sitting in my humble cabin, stripped of all her former arrogance, I could see a glimmer of the girl I used to be. And what do you want me to do? I asked softly. I need your help, Mom. I know I don't deserve it. I know I was horrible to you, but you're the only family I have. Tears began to fall down her cheeks and for a moment my heart softened. This was my daughter, after all. The girl I had raised, who I had loved unconditionally, no matter how much pain she had caused me. Amanda, I said calmly, 6 months ago you told me to go live with the pigs. You called me a poor old woman, you humiliated me in front of your dead father, and you kicked me out of the only house I had ever known as home. I know, Mom, I know, and I regret it so much. You took my family photos, my clothes, even my mother's china set. You said that I had never contributed to anything, that I had always been a burden. Every word he said was like a slap in the face to her. He could see it in her face, the way she cringed at every reminder of his cruelty. And now I continued. You come here to this cabin that you considered unworthy of you asking me for help. Tell me, Amanda, what has changed? Suddenly I'm a good mother because you need money. No, Mom, it's not that. I have realized what I did. I've had time to think, to see how I treated the only person who always loved me unconditionally. His words sounded sincere and a part of me wanted to believe them. But another part, the part that had suffered in silence for months, that had been humiliated and abandoned, remembered the pain all too well. Do you know what I've learned living here, Amanda? I asked her. I have learned that I can survive without you. I have learned that I don't need anyone's approval to have value. I have learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who least deserve it. Mom, please, I'll pay you. When I solve my financial problems, I will pay you back everything you lend me with interest. How much money will you pay me, Amanda? From what I've heard, you've spent almost all of your inheritance. What makes you think you'll be able to pay off debts of $400,000? He remained silent because we both knew he had no answer. I got up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. For months I had imagined this moment. I had fantasized about the day Amanda would come crawling back asking me for help. In my fantasies, I had been harsh, ruthless, giving him a taste of his own medicine. But now that I was here, seeing her really broken and desperate, my feelings were more complicated than I had expected. Mom, her voice was pleading. Now I know that I have no right to ask you for anything, but if I don't get this money, I will lose everything. The house, my law practice, everything. I turned to look at her. And why should I care about that, Amanda? When you had everything and I had nothing, did you care about my well-being? No. He whispered, and I hate myself for it. The moment of truth had arrived, the moment when I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. I could be like Amanda had been to me, cruel, ruthless, without compassion. Or I could be the person Robert had seen in me, strong, but also capable of mercy when it was deserved. Amanda, I said, finally, I'm going to make you an offer, one offer. His eyes lit up with desperate hope. I will help you with your debts, but not as a gift, like a loan, with very specific terms. Anything, Mom, I'll accept any terms. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. You haven't heard the terms yet. I sat across from Amanda, watching as she awaited my terms with a mix of hope and terror in her eyes. For months I had imagined this moment, and now that it was here, I felt a deep calm that I hadn't experienced in years. These are my terms, I began. My voice firm and clear. I will lend you $500,000 to cover your debts and give you a little margin to start over. Mom, that's more than I expected. I raised a hand to silence her. I'm not done. The loan will be at 5% annual interest, to be paid in 10 years. That's more generous than any bank. He nodded eagerly. I accept. Of course I accept. But there are more conditions. For the next 5 years you will work for me. You will come here every Saturday and help me with property maintenance, cleaning, whatever I need, no complaints, no excuses. I saw how his face changed slightly, but he nodded. It's okay. And every time you come you will speak to me with respect. None of the derogatory or condescending comments you got me used to. You will treat me like the mother I always was, not the nuisance you decided I was. Yes, Mom. Finally I said, getting up and walking to my desk, I want you to write a letter, a full apology for everything you did to me, not for me, but for your own growth. And I want you to read it aloud to the whole family at the next Christmas gathering. Amanda paled. Mom, that's humiliating. Humiliating. I looked her directly in the eyes. Do you find it humiliating to have to apologize for humiliating your own mother? For kicking me out of my home and spreading lies about me to the whole family? She looked down in shame. No, you're right, I will. Well, then we have an agreement. The next day he transferred the money to his account. Seeing her relief when she was able to pay off her debts gave me a strange satisfaction, not because I enjoyed helping her, but because she had taken complete control of the situation. The first Saturday she came to work, she arrived dressed in jeans and an old t-shirt, something I hadn't seen her wear in years. Without her expensive clothes and arrogant attitude, she looked more like the daughter he remembered from decades ago. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his tone respectful for the first time in years. "I need you to help clean out the back shed. I'm rearranging some things." We worked in silence for the first hour. She could see he was struggling with manual labor, his hands soft, not used to physical labor, but he didn't complain. "Mom," she finally said as we moved some old boxes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you get the money to lend me? I don't understand how you could save so much when you were poor." "I finished for her." She blushed. "I didn't mean it like that." I smiled, but I wasn't cruel this time. "Amanda, there are a lot of things about me that you never knew, a lot of things you never bothered to ask." That afternoon, after she left, I sat on my renovated porch drinking tea and looking at the forest that I now knew held my fortune. The trees rustled in the late breeze, and for the first time in a long time I felt completely at peace. The next few months, Amanda came in every Saturday, worked without complaints, and gradually we began to have real conversations, not the superficial interactions of years past, but honest conversations about life, about what really mattered. One autumn Saturday, while we were raking leaves, she surprised me with a direct question. "Will you ever really forgive me, Mom?" Leaning on my rake. "Amanda, forgiveness is not something I give or withhold as a reward. It's something that happens naturally when I see real changes." "And have you seen them?" "Real changes?" I looked at her, this 40-year-old woman who had rediscovered humility the hard way. "Yes, I have seen them, but more importantly, I think you have seen them too." He nodded, wiping away a tear. "I am so ashamed of the person I was." "Don't be ashamed of the past, Amanda. Use it to be better in the future." Christmas arrived, and with it the first family reunion since my exile. Amanda had kept her promise and wrote a full letter, apologizing not only to me, but to the entire family for the lies she had spread about me. When he read it aloud in my pretty sister's living room with the entire family present, the silence was absolute. I could see tears in the eyes of several relatives who had believed their stories and turned their backs on me. "Mom," Amanda finished, looking directly at me, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day I can earn it." After dinner, Linda approached me, her eyes full of regret. "Joyce, I can't believe we were so gullible. We should have known you better. People believe what they want to believe." I responded simply. "But the important thing is that now they know the truth." That spring, exactly 1 year after finding the key in the cabin, I made an important decision. The time had come to reveal my true situation, but I would do it my way. I bought a beautiful house in the hills overlooking the valley where I had grown up. It wasn't flashy, but it was elegant, comfortable, and completely mine. When Amanda arrived for her usual Saturday workday and found the cabin empty with a note directing her to my new address, her shock was complete. "Mom," he said when he arrived at my new house, "what's all this?" "It's my home," I responded simply. "My true home." "But how?" "The money you lent me, your financial situation?" I smiled, inviting her into the spacious kitchen, where he had prepared tea. "Amanda, remember that cabin you thought was worthless?" "Yes. It turns out that your father knew something that neither you nor I knew at the beginning. That land contained very valuable mineral rights." I watched as he processed this information, as his expression changed from confusion to understanding to something I can only describe as awe, mixed with respect. "You mean Dad knew?" "Your father knew exactly what he was doing. I knew that you would waste the liquid money, but that I would have the patience and wisdom to discover the true treasure he had left me." Amanda was silent for a long time. He finally looked up at me. "So, you never needed my money. You could have let me suffer the consequences of my actions." "Yes, I could have done it." "Why didn't you do it?" I approached her and placed my hand on hers. Because despite everything that happened, she is still my daughter, and because I believe that the person she used to be still existed somewhere inside you. Tears began to fall down her cheeks. I don't deserve it. Maybe no, I said softly. But a mother's love is not always based on what she deserves. That summer Amanda finished paying off her loan 3 years early. He had rebuilt his legal practice with a completely different focus, specializing in helping families in financial crisis. He said it was his way of giving back. Mom, she said to me one Saturday as we worked together in my new garden, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad had divided everything equally from the beginning? I thought about her question as I planted roses along the driveway. I think your father knew us better than we knew ourselves. I finally responded, I knew that I needed to learn that I could survive alone, and I knew that you needed to learn that money without wisdom is useless. And do you think we learned? I looked at my daughter. No longer the arrogant and cruel woman she had been, but someone who had discovered humility and gratitude the hard way. I thought about my own journey, from the devastated woman who had been kicked out of her home to the independent and prosperous it was now. Yes, I said, smiling as the afternoon sun bathed my garden in golden light. I think we finally learned. That night, as I sat on my deck watching the lights of the valley below, I reflected on what an extraordinary year I had spent. I had lost a family that took me for granted and had gained the respect of a daughter who had learned to value me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Amanda. Mom, I just wanted to say good night and thank you. Why? For not giving up on me, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see. After I hung up, I sat in the stillness of the night, feeling more whole than I had in years. Robert had been right. I was stronger than anyone had thought, including myself. And sometimes the greatest victory is not getting what you want, but discovering that you already had everything you needed to be happy. Amen.